The cold vastness of space stretched out before the Exodus, humanity's most advanced warship. Its engines hummed steadily, cutting through the dark expanse as it ventured farther than any human ship had gone before. The crew was on a mission to explore a remote region of space, far beyond the edge of the known galaxy. For days, the ship had been sailing through emptiness, with only distant stars for company. But that calm was soon to be shattered. Captain Jace Harrison sat in the command chair, eyes fixed on the blinking lights of the bridge's control panel. His mind was sharp, focused on the mission. But then, a sudden noise broke the silence, a faint beeping from one of the ship's communication systems. "Captain," Lieutenant Tessa Gray said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We've received an unusual signal. It's faint, but it's definitely artificial." Harrison's brow furrowed. "What kind of signal?" "It's hard to explain," Tessa replied, her fingers flying over the control panel as she analyzed the data. "It's not a standard transmission. The frequency is like nothing we've ever encountered. It's almost rhythmic, as if it's designed to communicate." The hairs on the back of Harrison's neck stood up. A signal like this, from deep space, so far from any known civilization. It didn't make sense. Humanity had only recently begun to explore beyond the solar system, and the idea of encountering another species, let alone one capable of sending such a complex message, was unimaginable. "Track its source," Harrison ordered, leaning forward in his seat. He had been on the bridge long enough to know that any unknown signal could be dangerous. But this was different. It was too deliberate, too precise to be ignored. Tessa nodded. "Aye, Captain." Calculating the origin now. Minutes passed as the crew worked quickly, analyzing the signal's path. They soon realized it was coming from a dense, uncharted region of space, beyond the nebula they were currently passing through. It was a place where no human had ever ventured. "Captain," Lieutenant Gray said, her voice growing more urgent, "I've located the signal source. It's coming from within a massive cloud of cosmic dust. There's something there, something big, hiding behind the debris. It's almost as if the signal is being masked by the dust itself." Harrison stood up. The thought of something hidden in that unknown cloud sent a chill down his spine. "Can you get a clearer reading?" "I'm working on it," Tessa said, fingers tapping rapidly on the console. "But the readings are strange. This isn't just an ordinary cloud. It's dense, but not natural. It's as if someone, or something, put it there to hide whatever is beyond." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Every officer on board understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a random signal. Someone, or something, was deliberately trying to hide their presence. "Set course for the signal's origin," Captain Harrison commanded, his voice calm but firm. "Let's find out what's behind this." The crew immediately set to work, altering the Exodus's path, steering the ship toward the dense cloud. The ship's engines roared to life, cutting through the blackness as they approached the unknown. Minutes felt like hours as they got closer, the cloud of cosmic dust growing larger on their screens. As the Exodus pushed deeper into the cloud, the signals grew stronger, almost pulling them forward. Then, without warning, the sensors began to pick up something massive, larger than anything they had ever seen. "Captain," Tessa gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. "I'm detecting. No, it can't be. There are objects, enormous ones. They're ships, planet-sized ships. There are dozens of them, hidden within the dust. And they're ancient, old, far older than anything we could ever build." The crew stared at the holographic display, which flickered with a haunting image. Massive starships, towering over the Exodus, buried in the cosmic dust like forgotten giants. They were enormous, far too big to be anything made by humanity, or even any known species. Captain Harrison's voice was barely a whisper, but it was filled with awe and disbelief. "What are these?" He had no answers, but one thing was certain. Humanity had just stumbled upon something far greater than they ever imagined. Something ancient, something lost, and something that could change the galaxy forever. But why were these ships here? And more importantly, why had they been hidden for so long? The mysteries had only just begun. The Exodus continued its slow approach, cutting through the dense cloud of cosmic dust. The massive ships, hidden in the darkness, seemed almost unreal. The holographic display on the bridge flickered as the crew tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Each ship was so enormous that it seemed impossible for any species, even the most advanced, to have built such structures. These weren't just ships, they were worlds. "Captain," Lieutenant Tessa Gray's voice broke the silence. "I'm detecting faint energy signatures coming from the ships. They're still active, but just barely. Whoever or whatever built these, they didn't leave them here by accident." Captain Harrison stood frozen, his eyes locked on the display, trying to comprehend the scope of their discovery. "How old are these ships?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Tessa worked quickly, her fingers dancing across the console. "Based on the energy readings, these ships are ancient, easily millions of years old. But the design, it's unlike anything we've ever seen before. The technology, the structure, it's far beyond anything humanity has developed." The crew was on edge. The discovery of the ships was both exciting and terrifying. Humanity had just found something beyond their understanding, something that could change the course of history. But it was also clear that no one knew who built them or why they had been abandoned in the dark corners of space. "We need to investigate further," Captain Harrison said, his voice firm but filled with curiosity. "Let's get as close as possible without putting the ship at risk." The Exodus edged forward, carefully navigating the thick cloud of dust. The massive ships loomed even larger now, their sheer size almost incomprehensible. They seemed like dormant giants, waiting for something to awaken them. Harrison couldn't help but wonder. What had happened to the civilization that built them? Where had they gone? And why had they left these incredible ships behind? As they drew closer, something strange began to happen. The dust around them seemed to swirl, almost as if it were being disturbed by an invisible force. The energy readings grew stronger, fluctuating wildly. Then, without warning, a deep rumbling sound echoed through the ship, a sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the massive starships ahead. The crew exchanged nervous glances. "What was that?" Ensign Mark Jensen asked, his voice shaky. "I'm not sure," Tessa replied, her eyes glued to the console. "But it's coming from one of the ships, it seems like it's coming to life." Harrison's heart raced. "Prepare for any unexpected changes. Let's move forward slowly. We don't know what we're dealing with here." The rumbling grew louder, reverberating through the ship's hull. As the Exodus approached one of the planet-sized starships, a strange energy pulse shot out from its surface, sweeping across space. It didn't affect the Exodus directly, but it was enough to send a chill down the crew's spine. "Captain, look," Tessa exclaimed, pointing to the display. A massive door on the side of one of the ships was slowly opening, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The energy readings from inside surged, as though the ship itself had just awoken from a long slumber. "Is it a trap?" Lieutenant Gray asked, her voice filled with doubt. Harrison took a deep breath. "We don't know. But if these ships have been hidden here for millions of years, we can't afford to ignore them. This could be the key to unlocking a whole new chapter in human history." He paused for a moment before making his decision. "Send a small team to investigate. We'll send drones first, but I want a landing party ready in case we find something unexpected." The crew worked quickly, deploying several drones equipped with cameras and scanners to enter the opening ship. The drones zipped into the cavernous interior, sending back images of dark, empty hallways and abandoned chambers. The walls were covered in strange symbols and unknown technology, none of which made any sense to the crew. Yet everything about it felt purposeful, as though the ship had been waiting for someone to come inside. "We're not alone," Ensign Jensen whispered, his voice trembling as he watched the drone feed. Just as the team began to process the data, a loud bang echoed from the outside of the ship. The sound came from deep within the cavernous interior of the massive starship. The crew jumped in their seats, eyes wide with panic. "What the hell was that?" Lieutenant Gray asked, her voice filled with fear. "Whatever's inside, it's not happy we're here," Captain Harrison said grimly. "Prepare for anything. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." The Exodus hovered just outside the giant ship, its sensors picking up strange signals that no one could explain. The crew had ventured too far into the unknown. And now, it seemed, something was about to wake up, and they were not prepared for what they might find. The ship's interior was silent once again, but the tension was palpable. The crew knew that they had only just begun to uncover the secrets of the planet-sized starships, and what they would find next could change everything. What had once seemed like a simple exploration had now become a race against time, as the crew of the Exodus faced the terrifying possibility that they were not alone, and that they had awoken something far older, far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. The mysteries were just beginning. The Exodus hovered in the cold void of space, its crew holding their breath as the massive planet-sized starship loomed ahead. The eerie silence of the ship's interior was interrupted only by the low hum of the Exodus engines. Inside, the crew was on edge, their minds racing with the implications of what they had just discovered. No one had expected to find anything like this, a ship the size of a planet, buried in cosmic dust for millions of years. As the team prepared for the landing, Captain Jace Harrison stood at the command center, watching the drone feeds carefully. The drones were still transmitting images of the strange, empty hallways, covered in symbols and ancient technology that was completely foreign to them. "I don't like this," Lieutenant Tessa Gray muttered under her breath, watching the eerie footage. The silence in the ship felt unnatural, like something was waiting in the shadows. "I know," Captain Harrison replied, his eyes scanning the screen. "But we need answers. The whole galaxy could be changed by what we find here. We can't just leave without understanding it." A loud clang suddenly rang out through the ship, followed by a strange, echoing hum. The crew froze, eyes wide. The noise had come from deep within the ancient starship. "I'm picking up something," Ensign Mark Jensen called from his station. "Energy signatures are spiking inside the ship. They're fluctuating, like something is charging up." Harrison felt his heart rate spike. "What do you mean by fluctuating? Is it a power source?" "It's not a typical power signature," Tessa said, leaning over the console. "It's more like the ship is coming to life. The energy pulses are erratic, like it's trying to communicate or defend itself." "Defend itself?" Harrison asked, a chill running down his spine. He had seen his fair share of strange phenomena, but nothing had ever been this unpredictable. He stepped closer to the screen, eyes narrowing at the sudden shift in the ship's energy patterns. The Exodus's sensors detected the hum growing louder and louder, as if the ship was beginning to activate. The once dormant giant seemed to be awakening, its immense power rearing up in a way that was not fully understood. "We need to make a decision fast," Captain Harrison said, his tone sharp. "I'm sending in a landing party. Tessa, you're with me. We need to understand what's inside that ship before this goes any further." The crew quickly assembled, donning their spacesuits and preparing for the unknown. The air on the Exodus was tense as they made their way to the airlock. Captain Harrison, Tessa, and several other crew members gathered in front of the massive doors. The unknown was waiting beyond. The moment the airlock doors opened, the crew stepped into the dark interior of the ancient ship. The air inside felt strange, stale, but not entirely lifeless. The atmosphere was thick, charged with something unseen, as if the ship itself were watching them. Every step echoed eerily through the empty corridors. "Stay alert," Harrison ordered, his voice barely a whisper. "We don't know what we're walking into." The lights flickered on as they advanced through the long, wide hallways. The walls were covered with intricate markings, symbols that pulsed with a faint light. Some appeared to shift and move, as if they were alive, responding to the crew's presence. Tessa approached a wall covered with glowing runes, cautiously reaching out to touch them. It feels like it's reacting to us, she said, her voice shaky. Like it's aware we're here. Harrison glanced at her, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. I don't care what it's aware of. Stay focused. We need to find the central control room. As they made their way deeper into the heart of the ship, the energy readings became more erratic, surging with power and then quieting, as if the ship itself was struggling to regain its strength. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The air felt thick, almost electric. Every shadow seemed to hold something. Something they couldn't see, but could definitely feel. Suddenly, the floor beneath them rumbled, shaking violently. The crew staggered, trying to regain their balance as the ship's walls trembled. A loud mechanical sound echoed through the hallways, followed by another rumbling. What the hell was that? Lieutenant Gray shouted, grabbing the nearest support beam to steady herself. Harrison clenched his fists. It's coming from ahead. Stay close. They hurried forward, the rumbling growing louder with every step. As they reached the end of the hallway, the crew was met with a massive towering door. Unlike the rest of the ship, which had been quiet and cold, this door seemed alive. It pulsed with energy, its surface shimmering as though it were made of living metal. This is it, Tessa said, stepping closer to the door. Her voice was filled with awe. This is where the heart of the ship is. We don't know what's inside, Harrison warned, but his curiosity was just as strong as hers. The unknown was too powerful to resist. The door slowly opened with a low creak, revealing a vast chamber beyond. It was massive, far larger than any room they had ever seen. At the center stood an enormous glowing device, a core of some kind. It hummed with power, sending waves of energy throughout the room. As they stepped inside, the air grew even heavier, and the hum of the device intensified. Suddenly, a low voice, ancient and incomprehensible, echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a sound. They felt it in their very bones, vibrating through their bodies. It was a message, a warning. The crew froze. Then, without warning, the device flared to life, sending a blinding light through the chamber. "Get back," Harrison shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. But it was too late. The ship was awakening, and they had just triggered something far more dangerous than they ever imagined. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening crash. The Exodus crew had just uncovered the heart of the ancient ship, a heart that was now alive and ready to reveal its secrets. But not all secrets are meant to be discovered. And as the ship began to power up, they knew one thing for sure. They weren't alone. Something else was out there, waiting for them. The blinding light from the core faded, leaving the crew disoriented and shaken. The immense energy surge had sent a shockwave through the chamber, and the crew staggered as the ship's massive hull trembled. The hum of the core seemed to pulse, stronger than ever, reverberating through their very bones. It was as if the ship itself was alive, aware of their presence, and now it was awakening from a long slumber. "Get back," Captain Harrison shouted, his voice trained, as he reached for Tessa's arm and pulled her away from the glowing core. The crew scrambled to follow him, hearts pounding as the floor beneath them rumbled ominously. "What the hell is happening?" Lieutenant Gray gasped, looking around at the vast chamber. The walls seemed to shift and writhe, as if they were part of the ship itself, reacting to the surge of energy. "It's coming online," Harrison said, his voice low but steady. "This ship is powering up. Whatever this place is, it's waking up, and we've just triggered it." Tessa looked back at the core. "Do you think it was meant for us to find it? Or is something else, something we don't understand, awakened with it?" "I don't know," Harrison replied, his mind racing. "But we need to get out of here. Now." Suddenly, the chamber's door slammed shut behind them with an ear-splitting thud, sealing them inside. The crew exchanged nervous glances, each of them feeling a growing sense of dread. There was no way out, and the energy in the room was escalating faster than they could process. The walls around them began to glow faintly, the symbols on them shifting once more. They weren't just symbols. They were coordinates, data, instructions. They were not random. They were part of a larger map, one that had been waiting for someone to unlock it. "What is all this?" Tessa whispered, her hand running over the walls, touching the symbols. "It's like the ship wants us to understand, like it's trying to communicate." Before anyone could answer, a voice boomed throughout the chamber. It was not a voice anyone could hear. It was more like a presence in their minds, a deep, resonating hum that seemed to belong to something far greater than them. "You have awakened the ship." The crew froze, their hearts pounding. It wasn't just the hum of the core. This was something else. "You have come to seek answers. But answers come with a price." The voice, though not heard with their ears, echoed through their minds. The crew felt the weight of the words, each one sinking deep into their consciousness. They were not alone. Whatever had built these ships, whatever force they had unleashed, was aware of them. "Captain," Tessa cried out, stepping back in fear. "What is that?" "I don't know," Harrison said, his voice grim. "But we need to be careful. Whatever this is, it's not just a ship. It's a living entity." The hum grew louder, vibrating through the air, until it felt as though the entire chamber was alive. The walls began to shift, opening in places that hadn't been visible before, revealing long passageways that seemed to stretch infinitely into the darkness. "We have to find a way out," Lieutenant Gray said, her voice shaky. She stepped back, grabbing the control panel on the wall. "But the ship is changing. It's like it's rewriting itself, adapting to us." Suddenly, the voice returned, louder and more commanding. "You seek sanctuary in the unknown, but you are not the first to do so. Many have come before you, seeking refuge. Few have left." The words hit the crew like a punch to the gut. "Sanctuary?" Ensign Jensen asked, his voice full of disbelief. "What does it mean by that? Who else has come here?" Before anyone could answer, the floor beneath them began to shake again. The core at the center of the room flared with a bright light, casting everything in an eerie, almost supernatural glow. The air grew thick with static energy, and the temperature dropped dramatically. "What's happening now?" Tessa gasped, pulling her space suit tighter around her. The crew had no idea what was going on, but it was clear that the ship was reacting to their presence in a way that they couldn't control. And then, out of the darkness of the far corner of the chamber, a figure stepped forward. The crew's collective breath caught in their throats. A tall, cloaked figure, seemingly made of shadow and light, appeared from the depths of the ship. It moved slowly, its form shifting as though it were made of fluid, almost unreal. It raised a hand, and the hum of the ship faded, replaced by a deep silence. The figure spoke, its voice not heard, but felt deep within their minds, like the otherworldly presence they had encountered before. "I am the guardian of this vessel," it said, its presence overpowering. "You are not the first to seek sanctuary. You are the latest in a long line of outcasts. But this ship is not a sanctuary. It is a prison, and you are now trapped within it." The crew stood frozen, unable to move. The figure stepped closer, its form flickering like a flame in the wind, its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowing with a cold, ancient light. The ship, the being, the power around them. It all began to make sense, and yet it made no sense at all. We didn't mean to awaken it," Harrison said, his voice breaking the silence. "We thought this was a discovery. We never knew." The Guardian's form seemed to pulse with an energy that sent chills through the crew. "All discoveries come with a cost," it said. "You have awakened what should have remained asleep." The ship rumbled again, and the floor shook violently. The Guardian raised its hand, and the doors to the chamber opened once more. The crew didn't hesitate. With a shared understanding, they turned and ran toward the exit, but the ship wasn't letting them go so easily. The chamber was alive, moving, shifting, as though the entire vessel were shifting to prevent their escape. Outside, the vastness of the starship awaited them. But now it was clear. They had unleashed something far darker and older than they could have ever imagined. And now they were trapped. The ship had awoken. And so had its secrets. The crew of the Exodus ran down the corridors of the ancient starship, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. The ship seemed to stretch on endlessly before them, its dark, twisting hallways impossible to navigate. The doors that once led them to seemingly simple rooms now loomed like obstacles, trapping them in the massive vessel. The walls seemed to move, shift, and pulse, as though the very ship was alive and responding to their presence. As they sprinted down the hallway, Captain Harrison led the way, his mind racing. Every corner they turned seemed to reveal more of the same: dark corridors, eerie silence, and that oppressive, unexplainable feeling that something was watching them. "We need to find an escape pod," Lieutenant Gray called out, her breath heavy as she tried to keep pace. "We can't stay here. This ship, it's a prison." Ensign Jensen, panting beside her, looked back toward the distance they had come. What the hell was that Guardian? It didn't look human, or anything we know. Captain Harrison turned his head, his eyes scanning the halls as they ran. "It doesn't matter. What matters is getting off this ship. We've activated something we don't understand. I don't know what the Guardian meant by this being a prison, but we're not sticking around to find out." They rounded another corner, only to be met with another closed door. The entire ship felt like it was trying to trap them inside, as though it were reacting to their every move. "This isn't right," Lieutenant Gray muttered, looking at the door. "The ship is adjusting itself. It's trying to block our way." They paused for a moment, catching their breath. The rumbling from earlier had only grown stronger, and now the lights in the hallway flickered erratically. The ship's strange hum had returned, louder and more insistent, vibrating through the walls. It was as if the vessel itself was alive, aware, and angry. Suddenly, the air was filled with a low, resonating voice that seemed to come from every direction at once. "You cannot leave. You are bound to this place. You have awakened the legacy of the Forgotten Ones. They sought sanctuary. They found only despair." The voice seemed to claw its way into their minds, filling their thoughts with images of ancient beings, alien species that had sought refuge. Harrison stood beside her, watching her work. He could see the frustration in her eyes, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They were trapped inside a ship that didn't want them there, with technology they couldn't understand, and a force that seemed determined to keep them inside forever. Suddenly, the console flared to life. The screens flickered and changed, revealing a map of the ship, though most of it was obscured by strange patterns and unreadable text. "I've got something," Tessa said, her voice tinged with excitement. "There's a control room located deep inside the ship. I think it's linked to the core. If we can reach it, we might be able to stop whatever's happening." "Lead the way," Harrison said, his voice sharp with urgency. He turned to the others. "We don't have much time. Let's move." The crew took off once again, the map showing the shortest route to the core's control room. As they moved through the shifting corridors, the sounds of the ship, once subtle, grew louder, like a warning. The hum grew deeper, and the walls seemed to shift more aggressively as if they were alive, shifting to prevent their progress. "I don't like this," Lieutenant Gray said, her voice tight. "It feels like the ship is trying to keep us in here. It's getting worse the closer we get to the core." "I know," Harrison replied, "but we have no choice. We need to stop this before it takes us down with it." The air grew heavier, more oppressive as they neared the control room. The walls closed in on them, the path narrowing, until it felt like they were walking through a tunnel that was slowly squeezing the life out of them. And then, As they reached the control room's entrance, everything stopped. The rumbling, the hum, the vibrations, all of it ceased in an instant. The crew exchanged confused glances. The silence was deafening. And then the voice returned. You seek control, but control was never meant for you. You are not the ones to awaken this ship. You are not the ones to unlock its secrets. You are the prisoners, not the masters. The walls around them began to pulse with an otherworldly energy, the symbols on the walls flaring bright. The floor beneath them cracked open, revealing dark, swirling tendrils of energy that seemed to stretch into infinity. The crew backed away, eyes wide with fear. Harrison's heart raced. They had triggered something far worse than they could have imagined. Get ready, Harrison shouted. We're not leaving without a fight. The ship was not just alive, it was angry. And now, it had them right where it wanted them. The crew had come to seek answers, but they were about to discover the true cost of awakening the Forgotten Ones. The ship had awakened, and now it was ready to show them what it truly held inside. The chamber surrounding the crew of the Exodus pulsed with a dark, unsettling energy. The walls now seemed to be alive, shifting and changing like living flesh, their glowing symbols more ominous than ever before. The air was thick with tension, every breath feeling as though it was drawn from the very core of the ship itself. Captain Harrison, heart pounding, motioned for the crew to stay close. The eerie silence that followed the voice of the Guardian seemed to suffocate them, pressing down like an invisible weight. Everyone, stay calm, Harrison ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. His hand hovered over his weapon, but he knew it wouldn't help. They were dealing with something far beyond human technology, something that had existed for eons. Tessa, still at the forefront of the crew, took a cautious step forward. I don't like this, she murmured, her voice strained. It feels like we're being tested. Her words echoed in Harrison's mind. She was right. Everything about this situation felt like a test, one they hadn't signed up for, but one they couldn't avoid. The energy in the room seemed to coil and thrum with an ancient power, as if the ship itself were waiting for them to make the wrong move. Suddenly, the floor began to crack, splitting open as dark, twisting tendrils of energy shot upward, reaching toward the ceiling. The symbols on the walls flared bright, each one seemingly alive and moving, as if they were watching the crew's every step. The glowing lines on the floor shifted, forming new patterns that seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. A voice, now louder and more commanding than ever, filled the room. You are not the first to awaken us. Many have come before you, seeking salvation from the trials of the galaxy. All have failed. None have escaped. The crew froze. The voice had changed, become colder, more menacing. The Guardian's cryptic words echoed in their minds, and for a moment, it felt as though the ship itself was laughing at their helplessness. Harrison clenched his fists. We don't need to escape. We need to stop this ship from falling into whatever nightmare it was designed for. The voice continued, its tone growing more insistent. You believe you can control us. You believe you can undo what has been set in motion. The voice paused, and then, ominously, it added, very well. If you wish to claim control over the ship, you will face the trial of the Forgotten Ones. You will prove your worth, fail, and you will be lost to the dark corners of space, forever. The ground beneath their feet shifted violently, throwing the crew off balance. The walls seemed to bend and warp, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Strange, echoing noises began to surround them, as if the ship's many chambers were coming to life, echoing the past horrors of the Forgotten Ones. Without warning, the tendrils of energy shot toward them. Twisting in the air like serpents, they snapped around the crew, forming barriers that separated them from one another. Tessa, Harrison called out, reaching for her, but the tendrils whipped between them, creating an impenetrable barrier. Tessa's voice came back, strained but clear. Captain, we have to find a way to break through. These are the ship's defenses, designed to test anyone who tries to control it. Harrison's mind raced. The trials of the forgotten ones, their failures, their suffering, it was all encoded in the ship, locked away in its very core. They weren't simply fighting a machine. They were fighting the will of an entire race's memory, a legacy of failure and despair. "We need to stay together," Harrison said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "The ship is using fear to break us apart. If we give in, we lose." The voice returned, booming, as if to remind them of their fate. "The trial begins now. Fail, and your souls will become one with the ship, lost, as so many have been before." Suddenly, the walls around them began to shift. The ground trembled as the ship's very architecture seemed to grow and shift in unnatural ways. New doors and passageways appeared, leading into shadowed areas that seemed to stretch into nothingness. "Everyone, focus," Captain Harrison shouted. "We need to stay together. We fight as one, or we die alone." The energy tendrils snapped and pulsed, but the crew, now reunited in their resolve, prepared to face the trial. They had to prove themselves worthy of controlling the ship, of understanding its power. The stakes were high, and failure meant losing everything. As they advanced, the walls around them began to change again, revealing images, visions from the past. Ghostly figures of long-lost species, their faces twisted in agony, appeared on the walls, their bodies fragmented as though their very souls had been absorbed into the ship. Tessa gasped as one of the figures reached out to her, its form flickering like a dying flame. It spoke in a whisper, its voice barely audible. "We sought refuge and found only torment. You are our last hope. Do not fail. Do not become us." The words sent a shiver down her spine. It was clear now. The trials were not simply a challenge of strength or intelligence. They were a test of heart. To pass, they had to overcome the ship's dark legacy, the suffering of the forgotten species that had once sought sanctuary within its walls. The ship's trials were not just physical. They were mental, emotional. The crew had to face their deepest fears, the darkest corners of their minds, to prove they were worthy of controlling this power. As they moved deeper into the ship, the trials intensified. The dark, shifting corridors became a maze, each turn revealing new horrors, new challenges. But they pressed on, never wavering, never giving up. And as they reached the heart of the ship, the true source of its power, they faced one final trial. Prove your worth. Face your deepest fears. Only then will you control the ship's heart. The energy around them surged. The trials had only just begun. Captain Harrison stepped forward, his heart steadied despite the uncertainty. He knew what was at stake now. He knew the price of failure. And he wasn't about to let this ancient, living ship claim them like it had claimed so many before. The trial of the forgotten ones had begun in earnest, and they had no choice but to see it through. The trials had pushed the crew of the Exodus to their breaking point. They had faced horrors, their deepest fears manifesting before their eyes. They had been separated, thrown into impossible challenges, and forced to confront the very darkness that had haunted the ship for eons. But now, they stood at the heart of the ship, where all the power, all the secrets, lay. The walls around them pulsed with an eerie glow, and the air was thick with the strange, vibrating hum of the ancient vessel. As they stepped into the central chamber, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of awe mixed with dread. The room was vast, its size almost impossible to comprehend. In the center stood a massive core, its form shifting and shimmering like a star in the night sky, filled with swirling energy that seemed both alive and ancient. It was the source of the ship's power, the heart of the forgotten ones. Captain Harrison led the crew forward, his eyes fixed on the core. His heart raced, but he refused to show fear. They had made it this far, and they weren't about to back down now. Tessa, standing beside him, felt a deep sense of unease. "This is it," she whispered, almost to herself. "The source of everything. The ship, the trials, the legacy of the forgotten ones." The voice of the Guardian returned, its tone colder than ever. You have come far, but the final trial awaits. To control the heart of this ship is to control the galaxy. Are you worthy? The words reverberated in their minds, and for a moment, it felt as if the very ship was watching them, judging them. The trials had been designed to test them, not just their strength, but their resolve, their capacity to lead, and their willingness to face their darkest fears. And now, they stood at the precipice, ready to face the ultimate challenge. "I think it's time we show the ship who we are," Harrison said, his voice firm. Tessa stepped forward, her eyes narrowing at the heart of the ship. "We need to focus on the heart, not just the ship's power." The Forgotten Ones weren't just trying to control it. They wanted sanctuary. They wanted a place to belong. This ship, it was meant to protect them, not imprison them. Suddenly, the core of the ship shimmered with a surge of energy, and a powerful voice boomed from within. "You wish to control the heart of the ship. You wish to unlock the power that has kept us bound for so long. Then prove your worth." A new force swept through the room. The crew felt a sudden, overwhelming pressure as the walls seemed to close in on them. The core of the ship pulsed with energy, throwing bolts of light around the chamber, each one powerful enough to disintegrate anything in its path. The ship's living essence, the energy that flowed through every corridor, every chamber, had reached its boiling point. This was the final test, one that would determine whether they could truly control the ship or be consumed by it. Without warning, the floor beneath them began to crack open, and the tendrils of energy that had plagued them earlier shot out, wrapping around the crew. They moved to defend themselves, but the tendrils were different now. They were faster, more aggressive, and filled with an almost sentient malice. The ship was no longer testing them. It was attacking them. Tessa and Lieutenant Gray fired their weapons, trying to disrupt the tendrils, but the energy simply absorbed the blasts, turning them into swirling dark tendrils that lashed out like whips. The crew was caught in a deadly dance, the walls closing in, the ship's living heart pushing them to their limits. "Stay together," Harrison shouted, but his voice was barely audible over the roar of the ship's energy. The ship was trying to break them. It was a living entity, and like all living beings, it feared change. It had survived for millennia, its creators long gone, but its heart had never stopped beating. Now it was faced with the possibility of being controlled by something new, by humanity. Harrison reached for the control panel on the side of the chamber. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before, alien symbols flashing across the surface, each one more intricate than the last. But among the symbols, he recognized a pattern. He remembered something from the Guardian's words: "Only those who understand the legacy of the Forgotten Ones will be able to control the ship." "This is about understanding their suffering," Harrison muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to the crew. "The ship wants to know if we're worthy. It's testing our ability to protect, not just to conquer. This isn't about fighting it. It's about showing it we understand its purpose." Tessa nodded, and the others slowly began to realize what Harrison meant. The Forgotten Ones hadn't sought control. They had sought refuge, sanctuary from the horrors of the galaxy. And now, the ship, despite its immense power, was asking the crew of the Exodus to prove that they could offer something greater than just survival. With newfound determination, the crew stepped toward the heart of the ship, facing the tendrils that writhed around them. The energy pulses slowed, the ship's hum growing softer, as if the ship was sensing their understanding. "We will protect you," Harrison said, his voice firm and resolute. "We won't abandon you, no matter what." In that moment, the ship's energy seemed to respond, the tendrils retreating into the walls as the core flickered and then began to stabilize. The hum of the ship softened, and for the first time, the crew felt like they were in control, not through force, but through empathy and understanding. The voice of the Guardian spoke one final time, softer than before. "You have proven your worth. You have shown that you understand. The heart of the ship is yours to command." The ship's energy pulsed once more, this time with a gentle warmth, as if recognizing the humanity within the crew. The heart of the vessel, once an insurmountable source of fear and power, now began to stabilize. The crew had won not through combat, but through compassion and understanding. The Exodus now held the power of the Forgotten Ones. The ship, once a prison of despair, would now be a sanctuary, a symbol of hope. Humanity had not only found a planet-sized starship, they had found a way to reshape the galaxy. And in doing so, they had proven the ultimate truth. The greatest power in the universe wasn't in the strength of weapons or the might of armies, but in the strength of understanding, empathy, and the willingness to protect. And with that, the crew of the Exodus set forth, ready to chart a new course for the galaxy, one where peace and sanctuary could finally be possible for all.